the comics industry, it's a long-term game, and you kind of have to bat your way through the minors and the indies before you can start thinking about going up for the bigger teams. I think this is my first time at a bigger team.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for stopping by DTR Comics yet again. As always, Dallas Taylor, and today I am joined again by David Pepose.
Hi. Thanks so much for having me. Excited to catch up, excited to be back on the show. And yeah, I'm really excited to get to chat with you about my new book.
Yeah. So last time you were on the show, you were in the midst of the OZ and getting that
Yeah.
all up and funded, and it was going really well. And it ended. Spoiler alert, it ended very well, everyone. But
Yeah.
how's that process been for you? How have things wrapped up
Good.
with issuing the
Uh,
OZ?
yeah, it's been a fun process. Actually, the printers are scheduled to be shipping the books my way, I believe today or tomorrow.
That's
So yes, those will be shipping from Florida here to my apartment in Los Angeles, and then the fun stuff of packing starts. But yeah, I'm really excited. The response to that book has been overwhelming. We'll be getting people digital copies soon. We're trying to stagger it out so people are getting there's not too much delay between the digital copies and the print copies. But yes, very soon we'll have all that for everybody. The PDFs look great. Ruben Rojas and colorist Whitney Kogar and letterer DC Hopkins are hard at work on the next installment, which I wrote a while back. So yeah, it's things are going well. I am excited to get 36 boxes of books in my 2-bedroom apartment. Um, which was already taken over by Gemini mailer boxes. So yeah, I'm very excited. I'm kind of chomping at the bit to get that going, and yeah, it's sort of once all those books are out of my apartment, then I can really kind of relax and breathe. But yeah, this is gonna, having read and reread this first issue, I'm incredibly proud of the work we've put out. I think this is some of the best work I've ever done, and I can't wait for readers to get to check it out.
I love that. So looking back at the whole process, kind
Yeah,
of, I mean, still being a little bit in the middle of it, but looking back,
sure.
do you feel like Kickstarter is an avenue that you want to go through again for future
Absolutely.
projects?
Absolutely. No question. The Kickstarter community really embraced us in a big way. And I couldn't be more grateful. I feel like I love the direct market, and we'll be talking about the direct market in a little bit. But I feel like the Kickstarter community is the great equalizer, creatively speaking.
Hmm.
If my career has had any one trajectory, it's been books that look like a sure thing in the rear view, but when it comes to actually pitching them, it has always been an uphill battle. And I think having a place like Kickstarter to say, no, there's a market, there's an audience for these books. And if you want to be short sighted and not pick it up, that's at your peril.
Hmm.
And I couldn't be more grateful for the Kickstarter community. I'm excited to see the rest of the OZ through on Kickstarter. I've made that
Hmm.
very, very clear to a lot of interested parties, and I'm excited for more books down the pike after the OZ is completed. I have a few ideas of a few more things that I'm excited to kind of put out. I'm still kind of figuring out the best way to stagger all these projects because
Hmm.
I want to make sure that people feel like they're getting their money's worth on one story before we jump towards another one. But there's there's a number of projects that I think would be a really fun fit for the Kickstarter community, and I can't wait to keep showing people what we've got in store.
I like that. So the book we're kind of talking about today is not
Yeah,
going through Kickstarter. So
no,
how do you parse which projects go Kickstarter and which projects
yeah.
go
Well,
direct market?
so it's funny. You may be giving me too much credit, and sometimes certain projects, they you don't pick them, they pick you. And
Hmm.
Scout's Honor, my new book at Aftershock, it's so unlike the development process of any book that I've ever done, um, in that this was just as much the book picking me as I picked the book. For those who don't know what Scout's Honor is about, it's It's about decades after a nuclear war, a cult rises from the ashes, and their Bible is an old Boy Scout manual. And our story follows Kit, who is really kind of the embodiment of all these Ranger Scout traditions, except for one secret. This is a cult that is really kind of driven by masculinity. And so she has to conceal her identity as a woman in order to serve. The thing is that Kit's a true believer, but she's going to discover a really dark secret at the heart of the Ranger Scout tradition, and it's going to really make her question everything she's ever known. And so she's going to have to risk, losing her own religion on a quest to find the truth.
Hmm.
And so I consider it's kind of like Fallout meets Mulan with a little bit of Handmaid's Tale and a little bit of Hunger Games thrown into the mix.
I
And
like that.
what's been such a fun process for me is Scouts Honor in a lot of ways feels like me leveling up in the industry. All of my books previously, I've been the one running everything. It's been sort of an idea that I'm too spiteful to let go. And so I find, I'm handpicking the teams. I'm the puppet master, kind of, coordinating all and herding all the different cats that go into making a comic. Aftershock, it's a different type of organization. They're a bigger publisher. This is the first time that I've ever worked with editors who are the ones sort of matchmaking the book and being sort of the final say in terms of what things go. And so the way that Scouts Honor came to be at Aftershock, and this is sort of peeking a little bit behind the curtain of how the comics industry works, is there are certain publishers that they want you to have a full creative team. They want you to have, a full issue done or a significant portion of an issue done. They want you to have a full outline together, and then they sort of say thumbs up, thumbs down. Action Lab, for example, the publisher that I've done my previous work with, that's been more like them, where they just once they accept the book, it's up to you to get the book done. And they will publish it and they will put it in stores, but it's really like they don't have the bandwidth to sort of keep their fingers in the pie. There are other publishers though, once you sort of step up to the next level, where they have editors, they have a stronger idea of what they want, and they want to be able to help develop the story alongside you. And so what happened to me was I've known a lot of people at Aftershock for a long time. People like my editor, Mike Martz, I've known since I was in college. I interned for him at DC Comics back when he was the Batman editor. Steve Rotterdam, I remember, I knew him also from my time at DC. Lee Kramer, the president of Aftershock, I've had lunch with him here in Los Angeles. And so I think that was a big confluence of how this project came to be. Was I'd known all of them for a while. All of them had been kind of itching to do a project with me. And finally, Lee said, okay, give me like a handful of ideas. What is something that you might be interested in fleshing out? And so I sent him, that was Lee's mistake, is he did not give me a specific number. And so I sent him probably like 10 ideas. And Scouts Honor will always make me laugh because that was kind of the one that kind of that squeaked in at the last second. That was sort of the idea that I had just come up with, this idea of history isn't just written by the victors, it's written by the survivors. And, what happens if we had a new Dark Ages and our our game of telephone that we call history suddenly gets disrupted in a big way. And what's very funny is all these ideas that I had like a laundry list of, like, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to do. They're like, that's fine, that's what the Scouts Honor looks pretty cool. And so I had a similar feeling that I did when my first book, Spencer and Lockup, picked up, which was, oh crap, okay, I guess I got to write this. And it wound up becoming a very different animal. Than this book has evolved many times over the development process. The final product of what we put out was very different than that initial kernel of an idea. But I think it's become it's certainly the most spiritual work that I've ever put out. And I think as somebody who, I'm Jewish, I was raised in a Jewish family. But I think my spiritual journey is very different than that of my parents, which I think was very different than that of their parents. I think that is certainly baked into this concept a bit.
Mm-hmm.
I think also, I grew up in Missouri, a pretty conservative part of the country, and I I think this speaks a lot to my own sort of political awakening once I left home.
Yeah.
It's sort of you grow up one way and you see the world in a certain way, and then it doesn't take much for the rug to kind of get pulled out from underneath you, and you suddenly start saying like, "Oh, all these things that I took for granted is true. The world might not reflect that in reality."
Mm-hmm.
And so that became a really fun concept to explore. This book is a lot about the corrosive power of secrets, but it's also about how the truth can be just as painful.
Mm-hmm.
Without spoiling too much, Kit is going to realize that all these values that she's really internalized and has seen as positives, and on paper can be positives, um, you know, they are sort of entwined with a very messed up human element. It's not unlike that of the disillusionment that a lot of Catholics felt with the Catholic priest scandals, where it was sort of people
Mm-hmm.
saying, "This is a tradition that I grew up in, and I felt so positive about, but how can I continue to be a part of this institution when all these horrifying secrets have come to light?" And
Mm-hmm.
so it will really, she'll be kind of losing her religion a bit, and she's going to have to figure out what values are still important to her as she kind of digs in deeper to find out what the truth is. Um, but she's not the only one with secrets, and there's going to be a lot of different characters that have secrets of their own that come to light, and that is going to put them through the ringer a little bit. And it's going to put Kit on a collision course with a lot of people that she has come to love and trust and respect over the years, because now she's kind of realizing maybe they're on the wrong side of history.
All right, sold. Fine. I'll go pick up the first issue.
uh,
I mean,
Thank
I
you.
was going to anyway, but that sounds really, really cool. I mean, I lived in Missouri for a couple of years as well. I grew up in Utah,
Mhm.
also a very conservative state.
Yeah.
So like what you're saying is very much speaking to me of like you start to see the world a little bit more
Yeah.
post childhood, and you
Yeah.
really have to reevaluate a lot of these ideals that are baked into you in these more conservative cultures.
Yeah.
So that
And
sounds really interesting.
what's been, what's been really fun for me also is kind of exploring the cult angle a little bit,
Mhm.
because when you're raised in this, you don't realize like, oh, like maybe we're a little militant, and sort of seeing, this was very much influenced by my younger brothers were both Boy Scouts and I was not. And
Mhm.
so, watching this from the outside looking in, when you're inside, it's very positive, and you see it as like, oh, this is I learned these survival skills, and I learned to be self-sufficient. You get this camaraderie, and then you're on the outside, and you're like, there's all this pageantry and the costumes and the bylaws, and it looks a little religious, and sort of,
Mhm.
what would turn what uh then you have a post-apocalyptic element, and suddenly all these survival skills become very, very important. And it's sort of like, it sort of becomes this feedback loop where you're like, okay, the survival skills are positive for us, let's double down on it. And when you've sort of lost all other history, it's suddenly, one of my favorite elements of this book, and we get into it a little bit in the second issue, and then really as the book concludes, um the scouts signature weapons are switchblades. And while we see, we think of the little Swiss Army knives, these guys are so, it's been the arc of history has been so long for them that they think, oh, well, there were these giant swords that everybody had, and they each had their own individual blades. And so some people had like, big can opener blades to pry open armor, and some had shears to tear through flesh. And oh, this guy's got even like a flamethrower component to it. And to them, it's like this big rite of passage. It's sort of, it's your coming of age. You are finally considered a man once you're given your first switchblade. And or things like the merit badges, where that's the mark of your training, is you're able to know which members of your squad know which skills just by one glance. And so, yeah, you've got the things like archery and you've got wilderness survival, but then you've also got explosives and tactical driving, because those are the types of skills that you would need to survive the Badlands. And that was, it reminds me a lot of my book Going to the Chapel, which was really
Mm-hmm.
fun because there was all this wedding imagery you could play with. And that was the same thing for Scouts Honor, is that the Boy Scouts of America, for better or for worse, there is so much imagery that you can play with. And yeah, I feel like we were able to get a lot in there. So we're able to sort of have this post-apocalyptic coming of age story. But for anybody who's ever been a Boy Scout, there's going to be plenty of sort of winks and nods that you're going to say, oh, I could totally see how you could build a post-apocalyptic society off of this, and one that might thrive for that matter.
That's really interesting. So, what went into your research process to flesh out this Boy Scout world? Were you just playing off of like your memories of your younger brothers, or like what
Yeah,
avenues did you follow to build
I
this?
it's funny. Yeah, there was a lot of research that went into it, a lot of reading about the history of it all. And what's funny is, yeah, talking to for somebody who did not serve as a Boy Scout, I'm shocked at how many of my friends growing up did. And what's so interesting to me is it reminded me very much of the split in religion, where there are some people who I grew up with who grew up very religious and they are still religious, and then there are some people who were completely turned off by their religious upbringing and they don't want anything to do with it anymore. And same thing with the Boy Scouts. I have friends who were Eagle Scouts, who are proud Eagle Scouts, who still say it on their resumes. And they're planning on, when their kids get old enough, they're gonna make, have them join the Boy Scouts. Meanwhile, I have friends who were Boy Scouts who were like, that was the most ostracizing period of my life, and I hate even thinking about it. And yeah, so it was really kind of, but it was interesting doing the research. And there were, for me, the big challenge was figuring out, like, okay, what pieces can I keep that will fit together in a cohesive storyline, and what is stuff that kind of has to get left on the cutting room floor. That's something I've dealt with a lot with Spencer and Locke. Is the same thing. Is I have like a laundry list of notes about Calvin and Hobbes, and I'm like, well, that won't fit here. Maybe it'll fit in another volume. Uh, but yeah, like, the idea of, the fact of, the Boy Scouts, and sort of his idea of like, okay, how can we, teach our young men, sort of basic, practical skills, and how
Mhm.
that made the trip from the UK to to the United States, and how I think it really feeds into, in a big way, kind of this toxic masculinity problem that we have. I mean, I think it's worldwide, but I think specifically the US has a major problem with it. And you know, things like the Eagle Scouts, we touch upon that in a big way, as the series goes on. Uh, yeah, it's just, but even just thinking like, okay, like, what are practical skills that the Boy Scouts learn today? Like, I read through a whole Boy Scout manual just to be like, all right, they have certain scout laws, and how could that get twisted by a cult? Saying, you should obey your scoutmaster without question. That is an actual Boy Scout law. What does that look like when you're in a cult? And your seven commandments, the fourth one is, you shall obey your scoutmaster without question. So it was definitely, uh yeah, there's a real, like, richness to the Boy Scout mythology that I think, it worked out really nicely for this story. I certainly, for me, the challenge was less about how can I find enough stuff to support this thesis of my story, And if anything,
Mhm.
it was, oh boy, how can I like what can I cut? Because there's so much to it. And I will say the one opportunity that kills me that I didn't get a chance to include, and maybe I've included the spirit of it, if not sort of mentioning it in the text, is there's a story of the unknown scout. And it was the very first when the founder of the Boy Scouts was wandering. I believe it was London, and he didn't know where to go. And a young boy gave him directions, and he was like, uh, "Can I pay you for this?" And he's like, "No, no, just doing my good turn for the day."
Hmm.
And that was kind of the genesis of the Boy. And maybe in a way, Kit kind of represents that ethos a little bit, is that it can be very easy to kind of get wrapped up in the pageantry of it all, and what can turn into this very competitive power struggle. And Kit's a true believer, but it's sort of an old school true believer, where she believes in the values of the Ranger Scouts. She believes that they can be a force for good, and that's what makes it so painful for her, is when she's going to find out that not everybody is as much of an idealist as she is. And that's something that she's really going to have to navigate over the course of this series.
That's really interesting. What I thought of while you were talking about like the mythology of the Boy
Yeah.
Scouts, how do you feel like the process with building off of that with Scouts Honor has
Mhm.
been different from your projects like Spencer and Locke or the OZ,
Sure.
where you took another existing property
Yeah.
and fleshed it out?
Well, this was a very different book in a lot of different ways, and a lot of that comes from basically developing it with a publisher instead of having pre-developed it and bringing it to a publisher. And so it's a very different way of doing things. This is the first time I've ever had to submit scripts for approval, for example. And Mike Martz and my editor Christina Harrington have been terrific in that regard. They really did a lot of the heavy lifting as far as matchmaking the project, as far as actually assembling the creative team. They've been really good at sort of giving me suggestions and ways to kind of punch up the scripts. And also in terms of troubleshooting scripts, there have been times where the timeline on this series has been accelerated beyond anything I've ever done before. This book, we got our artist Luca Casalanguida on board right when everything started shutting down for the pandemic. So the fact that it's November and we are sort of turning the corner as far as art on the final issue, and the fact that the book is coming out, the first issue is coming out January 6th, that's faster than even Spencer and Locke, which was a pretty rapid development time. Um, it's been different, it's first, it's just in terms of speed, you thankfully, when I have a deadline, I tend to move fast. It's sort of, you think of the Calvin and Hobbes quote where it's waiting for sheer last minute panic. Um, for me, it's sort of the moment I signed the contract. I said, okay, um, I want to get this done, and I want to get this done now, and I want to get this done right. This was my pandemic book, or one of my pandemic books, I should say. I had written the outline in the first issue. I think we got the green light for the book around Christmas of last year, but we didn't actually get a contract signed and weren't off to the races until shortly before everything shut down with the pandemic. So I wrote 80% of this series under lockdown. And I think that really kind of spoke to the flavor of this book a little bit. Um, but yeah, it's definitely, it's a learning curve for sure. Sort of thinking like, okay, I'm not the central editorial conduit anymore, for example. And so, my previous books, it's just shooting an email off you know, to my team and saying, okay, we got to fix this, 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 and this. Whereas I'm not, I'm not the arbiter of whether it's good to go or not. My editors are really that
Hmm.
central conduit now. And so, it's figuring out, what battles do you want to pick? saying, okay, like, is this something that really needs fixing? Which is something that I always struggle with as a creator, and as you know, a de facto editor in my previous books. You know, also sort of the we talk about the game of telephone. You know, English is not Luca's first language, and so
Mm-hmm.
what we've done is, if I have any notes, they go to our editorial team. They kind of will sort out, like, does this really seem worth it to us? Then they will pass it to Luca's agent, who will then translate it to Luca. And so that's, yeah, that alone is just like, oh, okay, like, you got to be really precise, figure out, like, you know, is this really important, or are you just being precious? Um, I think also kind of just figuring out, like, okay, you know, how do you write for an editor's consideration in mind? Because, you know, they have they have certain directives that they want to hit, both as editors and as representatives of my publisher, and making sure that sort of the things that I'm writing, that we can align in that regard. You know, Aftershock's been really supportive in that, like, if I have an idea, you know, and I throw it out there, they're usually pretty receptive to it. You know, for example, I just wrote the back matter for our first issue yesterday. And I don't know if I'm clear to talk about it yet, so I won't go too deep into it. But um, you know, I just said, hey, I'm gonna write journals from the Scoutmaster's perspective, and it's going to do a lot of world building, and it's going to flesh out this this marketing initiative that Aftershock has come up with for the book, and they've seemed really receptive to that. They both, you know, everybody was saying this morning, they're like, oh, that looked really cool. And I'm like, thanks, I spent all day writing it. You know, so it's definitely been a learning curve. I think, you know, it has just as much in common with work for hire as it does creator owned, in the sense that, yeah, I'm working with editors. You know, the editors are actually financing, or, well, I shouldn't say that, is the publisher is financing the book, which is very different than anything I've dealt with in the past. I every book I've done previously, I've paid for out of pocket. I financed myself. So it's nice not going into debt. And it's also cool having like a full team kind of supporting the work. I've never worked with a publicity team before. I've always just done my own publicity. I've never worked with the marketing team. You know, we had some sort of Skype call or a Zoom call a month or so back, you know, before the book launched, and it was like 18 people on that call. And I was just like, oh, the publishers that I've worked with in the past don't have 18 people in general. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, it's been, you know, I think it's been a fun way to kind of step up my game and figure out, you know, it's been a good way for me to re-examine, like, how do I write my scripts? Is there a way for me to do it more efficiently? You know, to be smaller on my panel counts? Is there a way to be more specific in terms of my direction? Um, because in the, you know, I know that if I'm a 20-year man or a 30-year man, like I want to be in this business, I'm not going to be able to always kind of be looking over everybody's shoulder. I'm going to have to delegate things. I'm going to have to let editors do their jobs, and I'm going to have to trust that my editors have been doing this long enough that they know how to troubleshoot things. And so I think this has been a really important first step in sort of developing that skill set for me moving forward down the line.
What are the ways you feel like you've grown the most within this process?
Um, yeah, I mean, you know, I think a lot of it's all about communication. I think that's really kind of the crux of it, and it's a skill. You know, when you do comics, you think like, oh, well, you know, I can write what I consider to be the best script, and I can sort of oversee a team to make sure that it's executed, you know, as well as it possibly can be. And at the same time, I feel like my process in the past has been, uh, we'll say, energy intensive. You know, and some of that is because I'm working with artists who are coming up, you know, with just as much experience as me, if not less. And so, there's a certain degree of troubleshooting that has to happen. But I feel like being able to communicate up front and sort of anticipate, like, hey, this is an image I have in mind. Reference art is something that I think is really important that I'm still kind of working on, is saying, like, hey, this is an idea I had for the panel. What do you think? At the same time, though, I feel like Aftershock's been really good to me in the fact that, like, I'm brought in, every step of the way. Like, I'm getting the same thumbnails that my editors are. And so I have an opportunity to say, hey, like, what do you think about this, for example? You know, uh, or the colors coming in, or the letters coming in. And so I think I've learned how to better kind of, measure twice, cut once,
Mm-hmm.
which is something that I think all of my collaborators will be thankful for. Uh, and yeah, and just, being able. I think the other thing is it's a good reminder for me that I'm not going to choke under pressure. I feel like, especially, I've known Mike for a long time, and Mike was really instrumental in a big way for me figuring out what my career trajectory was going to be. I'm probably getting too honest here, but it's when I interned at DC in the summer of '08, which, I don't know if people remember what happened in the summer of '08. It was just a cataclysmic recession. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember being really kind of heartbroken at the time that there were no jobs available. And Mike sat me down and he said, nobody walks onto the Yankees. And by that, what he said was, the comics industry, it's a long-term game. And you kind of have to bat your way through the minors and the indies before you can start thinking about going up for the bigger teams. I think this is my first time at a bigger team. And, I laugh that I'm a 10-year overnight success. It took me it took me 12 years to get here. And I owe a lot of that perseverance to Mike, because I think if Mike had not been so generous with his advice, it would have been very easy to kind of throw up my hands and give up. And, you know, so working with him is sort of, oh, I don't want to let Mike down. And that can either cause a lot of anxiety where you sort of fold up on yourself and you just can't execute, or it's sort of the rocket fuel you need to say, okay, well, letting Mike down is not an option.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are we going to do to lock and load and get this book out? And so, that has been, I think, a really validating experience for me. I mean, I'm sure I'm not the only comics creator who struggled with imposter syndrome. And so the idea that no, like when the chips are down, when you have a deadline, when you have people depending on you, you will get that book out. Um, that is a valuable lesson to take to heart, and it's something that I can always look back on for any future books I do down the line, saying I know that I can hack it. And that's a very important thing, and valuable thing for me as an indie creator.
I like that a lot. So let's play the hypothetical game here for a
Shoot.
second. Let's say you get onto the Yankees, right? What
Yeah,
are some of your dream projects down
boy.
the way?
Um, boy, there's a lot. I mean, I've talked about Captain Planet being my white whale. And it's one of those things I don't really know who owns the rights to it. I think DC might own the rights to it, which means it's not going anywhere. But if like a place like Boom or IDW was able to kind of like cut a deal, I would fight a person to do a series on that. I think you could do a really cool like globe trotting like first Avengers movie meets Avatar: The Last Airbender, but with like a globe trotting environmentalist spin. Shazam, Billy Batson. I could write 70 issues of Billy Batson and not get tired.
Yeah,
Uh,
that seems like a good fit.
he, for the guy who like ruined Calvin and Hobbes, I feel like I could really, I would love to handle somebody with an idealistic streak like Billy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or on the other side of the coin, Doctor Strange. I feel like Billy is pure potential. Stephen Strange is that guy looking back at all the mistakes he's made. I feel like he would be a really fun character to work on. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to do a team book eventually. I sort of, if you gave me the keys to Justice League or the Avengers, I would be overwhelmed. But I've been thinking about that since I was like 13 years old. But yeah, I mean, the fun thing is like the majors are always this has been sort of the zen that I've gotten, and I think working in creator owned has really made me feel this way, is that the majors will always be waiting.
Mm-hmm.
I like being able to kind of do my own world building and kind of call my own shots a little more.
Mm-hmm.
It's not to say, you know, I've spoken with people at Marvel and DC, and the message has always been, if you need me, give me a call. I'm there. And maybe that might happen down the road. Fingers crossed. But I have found, for example, there's a lot of overlap that I can just do in the creator own sphere. I just did a short story in the Nightmare Theater horror anthology, which is sort of horror riffs on film and television. And so I did Power Rangers versus The Walking Dead. Uh, I don't have to ask permission anymore, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
I my feeling has always been whether I'm lucky enough to have a publisher who sees the value of the concept immediately, like Aftershock did with
Mm-hmm.
Skeptic, or if it's more like every other book I've ever done, which has always been an uphill battle to get somebody to realize, oh, people might actually like this book. I'm not waiting for permission anymore. And so I think that is ultimately the way to kind of get your success in the industry. It's sort of you go your own way and they'll find you. And I've gotten pretty far by sticking by my guns, and so that's why I don't get worried about setbacks too much. I don't get worried about rejection. Um, I say, rejections is just another word for bullet dodged. Uh, because if they don't like it you know, in the baby stage, they're not going to like it as an adult. Um, but I will say that I think I've had a really positive experience with Aftershock as far as Scout's Honor has been concerned. And even that was born out of a lot of rejection. That was certainly not the first pitch that I sent to Aftershock. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and, it took a while to find the thing that clicked with them. And that's cool. Like not every project is going to work at the same place. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
different publishers have different agendas and different directives that they're shooting for, and so sometimes it's not always the best fit. But having that backing, having that support, having somebody else say like, just from the log line, that looks cool. Um, that's an interesting experience that I've never had before, and it's been one that's been really gratifying. And I think any success that Scouts Honor has, it's because of that initial confidence that Lee and Mike and Christina and Steve and the rest of the Aftershock team have had about this project. So I will always be grateful, not just for all the hard work they put in this project, but for just believing in it from the jump.
I like that a lot. I guess my final question, and then maybe some
Yeah,
wrap up fun,
sure.
but what do you feel like, what has been the most challenging and the most rewarding thing about creating the world of Scouts Honor?
Wow. Great question. I mean, the most rewarding thing I'll start off with. There's been some really fun character beats to this. Kit kind of going from true believer to doubter to someone who's kind of in the middle. The fact that she's a very tough character, but inside she's kind of soft. I've said difference between Kit and any other character I've written in the past is my characters usually have been sort of simmering in their trauma for a long time, and it's really kind of affected who they are. And so we see these traumatized individuals then get thrown into a situation. Kit is very different. Kit, we're kind of watching her grapple with this in real time. We see exactly what kind of knocks her off her feet, and then we have to see her kind of struggle to get back up immediately. Um, that's interesting. In a lot of ways, she's the most hopeful character I've ever written, even if she's living in like a post-nuclear war, scout compound. I also really like the dynamics that she has with certain members of the cast. The scoutmaster, for example, who he also threads that fine line between he's very intimidating, and he obviously he's a true believer, and he's survived a lot. You wouldn't be the scoutmaster if you weren't tough as nails. But at the same time, even though he doesn't know Kit's secret, he kind of has this paternal spin to every conversation he has with her. Much to the chagrin of the scoutmaster's son, Dez, who is Kit's best friend, who also doesn't know Kit's secret, and sort of seeing that dynamic unfold. Going from a friendship to a rivalry to something a little more in the middle. That's been another really gratifying thing to write and explore. I mean, Dez, in certain ways, is like the Loki to Kit's Thor. Always a bridesmaid, never a bride. And yet he has this genuine affection for his sworn rival. And sort of seeing how that plays out has been particularly fun. And Dez has his own secrets. We talk about sort of this corrosiveness of secrets and how that's Kit just having to hide a crucial part of who she is in order to pursue her true calling is already a heavy burden for a kid. Dez has something similar. Those things, those elements, the human element behind it, has been really rewarding. And I hope, if we've done it right, that, there will be people who see themselves in this that might not have thought to have seen themselves in a Boy Scout related book. The challenging thing, has been making sure that, we tell the story as compassionately as we can, making sure that, we kind of walk the tightrope with as much grace as we can. It's been making sure that we're able to fit, a big king size story into, fairly limited page real estate. I will say, this is a small thing, but it's an important thing. This is the first book that I've ever written that was told primarily in 20-page chunks versus 22. And boy, every time I wrote a script, I was like, my kingdom for another 2 pages. I say that with every script, but I said that particularly in this one, because it's like, all right, how do I tell this story without killing Luca? How do I could do this with all 6 panel pages, but then Luca would fly from Italy and have me murdered. um, and I think also just, sort of saying like, okay, like, how do you be flexible with your writing? Because I've been very used to in my previous books, and it's because it served me well, that it's sort of like, well, the buck stops with me. The buck only stops with me. And so that means I've got to sort of troubleshoot everything I can possibly troubleshoot. And I have to sort of have the final say on, what's this book going to look like? That can make me a little bit of a control freak. And so being able to be a little bit more fluid and say, no, wait a minute. Like, you can't be this precious with your work. And you have to give your collaborators room to kind of express the guidelines that you've given them, but in their own way. And I think Luke has done a really amazing job with that. He's if you haven't read his work, he's done stuff like James Bond or Lost Soldiers over at Image Comics, and he's got this really fun sense of drama. He focuses so much on Kit and Dez's moments of humanity, which I really like. But then the script shifts gears into action, and suddenly you're like, oh, that's why Kit has been trained in a survivalist cult most of her life. Yes, she is not somebody you want to be facing in the wrong way in an alley. And the way that Luca kind of quickly shifts gears visually in that regard is really cool. And colors Matt Milla, from his work on Daredevil. Um, he uh, he has done a really cool job with the colors on this, where he's sort of able to focus on this drama, but he's also, he's the one constantly reminding us, like, this is a nuclear wasteland that they're living in. And so, the beautiful land of Colorado is looking very different 300 some odd years later.
Mhm.
And yeah, and Carlos Manguel, our letterer, our cover artist Andy Clark, and colorist Jose Villarrubia. Um, yeah, I've just been really fortunate to have a team as top shelf as I have, and having Mike and really Christina Harrington deserves so much credit. She's really she championed the book when it was pitched. She has really taken point on a lot of the editorial decisions. She's been a terrific editor to work with, and so having that team, it's every book leaves you feeling a little nervous before it comes out, but having a team like this, it makes you feel at least a little bit less nervous.
I like that. I like that. All right. So the final and somewhat selfish question for me,
Yeah.
like everyone else, I have binged everything on Earth, like looking for good content
Yeah.
in lockdown. So what have been some of your favorite things that you have watched,
Yeah.
read, interacted with in the last couple
Yeah.
months?
Let's see. If it wasn't, I wouldn't have survived election week if it wasn't for Watch Dogs Legion and Hades. Those have been very fun, bingeable stuff that I've been playing lately. Been watching, I've been watching a lot of New Girl lately. It's just kind of like a
Yep.
comfort item. Halt and Catch Fire, love that show. A lot of horror movies lately. I rewatched Invisible Man recently, the new one. That was the last movie I saw before lockdown in a theater. Um, yeah, I feel like, and then just keeping up on my comics. I've been catching up on stuff. Ten of Swords over at Marvel has been really fun. Just catching up on Dark Metal, our Dark Knights, Death Metal. That's been really cool. I've been reading Scott Snyder's American Vampire. I had not I had a bunch of the trades and had not read them, so I've been going through that, and I mean, yes, it explains why has had a 10-year career writing Batman.
Mhm.
A very flexible genre, or a very flexible concept that kind of lends itself to a lot of different genres. Um, yeah, I feel like that's the stuff I've been binging on lately. Besides just sort of, anxiety about the state of the world, anxiety about, like, I've got something like 900 plus books that I have to pack. I think it's like 960 books that I have to pack and ship from my 2-bedroom apartment in the next few weeks. But yeah, I think, yeah, Watchdog, Legion, and Hades. Those are really the two games that That's how I've been decompressing from script writing the last a couple weeks, and I do not regret those purchases one bit.
That was Miles Morales for me this last week.
That's
Got it on
next
the
on my list.
PlayStation. Oh, it's too short, but it's so good. You'll love it.
Okay, I'm excited. I like the original PS4 Spider-Man, so I'm stoked to see. Everybody on my Twitter feed has been saying, "Oh, it's amazing, it's amazing." I'm like, okay, I guess I'm back into it. So yes, next week, once I finish this next script, that's my reward to myself.
Perfect. Good reward. Well, again, thank you so much. I
A
love doing
pleasure.
interviews with you.
Of
This is super
course.
fun. Looking forward to Scouts Honor and every other project in the
Thank you so
foreseeable
much.
future.
Really appreciate you having me on the show. And yes, let's do this again soon.
Cool. All right. Thank you so much.